And there's a lot on Joe Burrow to go and win this game now. All right, welcome in. It's the report for November the 21st. Week 12 is underway, and we are going to start with the last thing we saw, which was the kickoff to Week 12. On Thursday night, the Houston Texans beat the Buffalo Bills 23-19. And for anybody who watched this was, of course, about the Texans defense and what they were able to do to Josh Allen and that Bills offense. They wind up generating 3 turnovers. They register 8 sacks. They get the big stop at the end. Despite giving up a huge play on 4th and 27 on the hook and ladder, they're able to get the stops when they need to get them. And now I think we can kind of look at the Houston Texans as a team going forward that can be a real threat that's hitting a critical stretch of the schedule. This was the first one, but after this, they go to Indianapolis and then to Kansas City. And we'll know a lot more about the Texans and whether or not where they're at 5-5 makes them truly dangerous in about 17 days after they're done with this 2-game stretch. Again, at 5-5, they got a shot to get in the playoffs. At 7-5, they would be a real threat to get in the playoffs. And I think this is the type of team that can win when you get into a playoff setting. Here's why. On the defensive side of the ball, they have big-time players at multiple levels, and they are stacked at the premium spots. Will Anderson, one of the best players in all of football now, a real defensive player of the year candidate. And then you have opposite him a guy who would probably be the number 1 edge rusher for more than half of the NFL teams. That's Danielle Hunter. So you've got Hunter and you've got Anderson on the edges. And then outside of that, you've got Derek Barnett, you've got Tim Settle, you've got Sheldon Rankins. You've got a crew of guys that can make plays. And so this is a dominant defensive front. Again, a dominant defensive front that generated 8 sacks. And then on the back end of that defense, the anchors are the corners. Derek Stingley, who's probably one of the top 2 or 3 corners in all of football. He's right up there with Patrick Surtain at the top of the league. And then opposite him, you have Kamari Lassiter. And Lassiter is probably a top 20-ish corner. So, you're looking at it's tough to get open against them. If it's tough to get open against them, you have the quarterback holding the ball, which is what happened last night. And if the quarterback's holding the ball against that defensive front, the inevitable happens. Now we look at what they can do offensively and how much that's going to change when they get CJ Stroud back in the lineup next week in Indianapolis. And this is a lot's going to be on Stroud now to try to regain the form of 2 years ago and be the player that I think everybody knows that he can be. We've seen flashes of it this year in the new Nick Caley offense. It does look like some things are starting to come together on the offensive side of the ball. They have a bona fide number 1. We know that in Nico Collins. But there are 3 rookies that I think are going to be key to CJ Stroud regaining form and the Texans reaching their ceiling. Ariante Ursary at left tackle, who's been pretty good. He got banged up a little bit last night, but he's been pretty good. You've got Jaden Higgins at receiver, who I think is a very legitimate number 2 now to Collins. You see some of the things, some of the young player things last night, some of the trouble he had keeping his feet in bounds on certain plays, but he's certainly got big time ability, and they expect him to continue to ascend. And then the third rookie would be Woody Marks. This has been a weird year for the Texans at running back. They, of course, lost Joe Mixon back in the summer. Then they're relying on Nick Chubb, who is definitely past his prime. Woody Marks looks to me like the type of player that can be a difference maker for them down the stretch as well. So those 3 rookies are really key to where they are offensively. Marks, Higgins, and Ursary. But again, like if they can get that offense, if those 3 guys can help CJ Stroud regain the form of a couple of years ago, this could be a truly dangerous team going in the playoffs. And we should know where they're at after the next couple of weeks based on who they're playing. They're in Indianapolis on November 30th. They're in Kansas City on December the 7th. Our second topic for today is right back there in the AFC South with the Indianapolis Colts visiting the Kansas City Chiefs. This is a measuring stick game for the Colts. They come in at 8-2, one of the best teams in football on balance over the course of the year. Hard to argue with the results. They look to me like a team that has very few holes. What we've seen of late, though, and this is what's going to be interesting about this matchup, what we've seen of late is when they can't play the game on their terms, it looks different. They've struggled some on the offensive line when they've been forced into obvious passing situations. You saw it against Pittsburgh. You saw it some against Atlanta. And so an offensive line that's looked like the best, that looked like the best in football for stretches earlier in the year, has struggled a little bit. So what is that going to look like in Kansas City's environment with all of the noise there? That to me is a big question. That, of course, is going to affect the way Daniel Jones plays. Jonathan Taylor, for that reason, becomes such a big part of this as far as managing down and distance and keeping control of the game. And then how does the defense look against Patrick Mahomes in that offense? And this is obviously, I hesitate to ever use the word desperate for the Chiefs, but their schedule is not easy down the stretch. They've got 2 Thursday games. They've got a Thursday game coming out of this one. They'll be playing in Dallas on Thanksgiving. The rest of the way, there aren't a lot of layups for the Kansas City Chiefs. And so this is an important game, just in that this is one that the Chiefs need to build some momentum towards the end of the year, based on where they are coming out of that Denver game. And I'm not hitting the panic button coming out of that Denver game, just because you look at where Denver is and what Denver's been. Give Denver some credit. That's a really good Denver team. They were playing at home. That game was determined by a field goal, but the margin for error keeps shrinking for the Chiefs. And if they get in the playoffs, I think they've got as good a chance as anybody in the AFC to get to Santa Clara, but they got to get there first. And so, a game like this one, I think could wind up being really pivotal in where they're trying to go. And I think it's a team, again, that could catch fire. I don't think talent's an issue. I know some people have said that. I don't think talent's an issue. I think they get their tackle situation settled down when Josh Simmons gets some more reps. I think eventually they'll be able to unlock the downfield passing game that they've struggled to unlock over the last couple of years, the injuries they've dealt with Worthy and Brown. It's just about putting together complete performances now, and I think they're very capable of doing it. Finally, our third topic, the Cincinnati Bengals, whose season is on life support now at 3-7, will host the New England Patriots. And this is a huge game for the Bengals because it looks like they're getting Joe Burrow back. They will not have Jamar Chase, and there's a lot on Joe Burrow to go and win this game now for the Bengals. You look at where they are, again, without Chase. The defense has been historically bad over the course of the last year and a half. So a lot is on Joe Burrow to not only come in and play well, but to come in and help carry the team. And I think Joe Burrow is capable of it, and they feel really good about where he is physically. He had a really good practice on Wednesday. They came out of that thinking, what more do we need to see? He comes back on Thursday, felt really good, was a full participant again in practice. We'll see how he is coming out of that Thursday practice. They're going to make a final decision this afternoon on whether or not he's going to play on Sunday. But I'd be surprised at this point if he doesn't play. This is one of those things, he's healed very quickly, and it's just sometimes it's hard to explain with some of these guys. Burrow's been hurt a lot, but he has healed quickly in these sorts of situations. He's been ahead of schedule routinely when he's coming back from major injuries, and this is another example of it. I don't think the Bengals are putting him at any undue risk. I don't think that organization, based on the approach that they've taken with all of his injuries, would ever put him at any sort of risk. So, I think they're going to make a responsible decision here. And this is going to come down to Zach Taylor and Joe Burrow talking about it today. My expectation would be that they will make the decision that Joe Burrow will return to the lineup on Sunday. And hey, if they can beat New England, then they can go on to Baltimore on a short week and beat the Ravens. Now, all of a sudden, you got something to work with, and you've got a chance to sneak in. And if you can sneak into the AFC bracket with Joe Burrow as your quarterback, you do have a chance. Remember, this is, a guy who I think you could make the argument was the best quarterback in football last year. Statistically was off the charts. He didn't win the MVP. And I'd probably still give the nod to Josh Allen, when we're talking about the quarterback and who the best players. But Joe Burrow was certainly in that argument last year. And if he can come back and recapture that level of play and they can sneak into the playoffs, then obviously the Bengals would be very, very dangerous. But this week, they got to do it without Chase, which is obviously a big factor against the 9-2 Patriots team. Appreciate you guys coming out. As always, you can leave comments, questions, reviews down below here on YouTube, or you can get to me on my social media channels at Albert Breer on Twitter, at Albert R. Breer on Facebook, at Albert_Breer on Instagram. Enjoy the games this weekend. We will see you guys next week.